Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I am your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on social media at MMALOTN. This week we're talking about UFC Paris. Obviously, beginning of September is usually their annual trip to France, specifically Paris. And you know the names that they normally bring with them for these spots and giving spotlights to the main event, obviously, in Nasruddin Imavov as he takes on Caio Borralho in a high-stakes middleweight matchup. We just had our newly crowned middleweight champion from a few weeks ago, Khamzat Chimaev, saying that he wants to fight again before the ending of the year. And I think the winner of this matchup will surely be able to stake their claim unless Anthony Hernandez or Renier de Ridder are able to make a claim themselves later on in October. But all eyes are set on them. But also in the co-main event, we have a very fun lightweight battle between Benoit Saint-Denis taking on the streaking Maurizio Ruffy from the Fighting Nerds as well, hoping to set up some good juju for Caio Borralho after Borralho makes the walk in the main event there. Decent card all around. Originally scheduled for 14 fights. Today, Faris Ziam pulled out. I believe his grandmother passed away, and there's the funeral arrangements and all that stuff that he has to go through. So he's pulled out of his matchup with Caio Fernandez. Now that brings us down to 13 fights for this UFC Paris card. Let's do a quick recap of UFC Shanghai in terms of the lock of the night and dog of the night play, and then we'll get into the breakdowns here for you guys. Lock of the night play in Rongju comes through with relative ease as he goes out there, batters his opponent, and gets us the win there. I believe we went 3-0 in lock of the night plays since the last time I've done the recap for you guys. And that brings our lock of the night record now to 44-27 on the year for a 62% hit rate. I don't know if we'll hit the 75% rate by the end of the year. Obviously, we got a solid September, October, November, December, 4 months left in the year. So obviously, I'm going to be aiming for that. But again, I'm not going to be chasing anything to try to get to that mark, just staying the course. Dog of the night plays, we went 1-2 since the last time I recapped it, and I believe one of those two losses was Long Zhao as he went up against Su Young Yu, and I thought that was a fight that Zhao actually won, but very close fight. I thought we were on the right side with the plus money there, but we're unable to get over the finish line with him. So that now brings our Dog of the Night record to 39-48 for a 45% hit rate. Still firmly in the profit for Dog of the Night plays, and obviously Lock of the Night plays now as well. So let's try to keep that trend rolling. All right. Without further ado, like I said, we got 13 fights to get through for this UFC Paris card. And we're going to start it off in the women's strawweight division with Shauna Bannon coming in at plus 260 going up against Sam Hughes, who comes in at minus 310. Now, starting off on the Bannon side of things, who she's coming off of a fight between two of the lowest level women on the roster, in my opinion, between her and Pooja Tomar. Maybe Elise Argeline has a case there. I believe that fight with Bannon went to a split decision, so kind of just goes to show the level that Bannon is fighting at. She comes from a kickboxing background, utilizes a lot of movement, a lot of kicks. She's very aggressive off of her back, just as we saw when she pulled off her first ever submission victory against Pooja Tomar last time. Tomar hurt her badly, dropped Bannon, but Bannon was able to kind of hold on long enough to eventually pull off that armbar and force the tap from her Indian opponent there. Impressive to see Bannon be able to bounce back from getting rocked early and then be able to pull off that submission. But considering how that fight played out, it kind of just shows the volatility of betting on fights with that low level of talent to deal with. Bannon, again, good kickboxing, mediocre kickboxing, I should say. Not much of a threat to find finishes either in the striking realm. She kind of just wants to outpoint you from distance. But it was impressive to see her really throw up submissions off her back and stay active there. And I'm sure Patty Holohan, her head coach, had a lot to do with that as well. Now, she's going up against a very tough out here in Sam Hughes. Don't let the 10-6 record fool you, though. As we've seen time and time again, she's been able to go out there and pull off upsets against a lot of her opponents. Most notably, her last 3 wins. Jacqueline Amarim, she was able to shut down the BJJ black belt there. She was unable to overcome the athleticism and power advantage of Yasmin Yadagui, but then she was able to pull off the decision over Victoria Dudikova and Stephanie Luciano. Very close fights, both of them, but she's able to just gut those out and really get the wins there. I like to call her like the female Darren Elkins, not as violent, but like she has some of the issues in the technical game that are always going to cause her some issues, and the lack of athleticism as well. But she makes up with it with grit, determination, pressure, and cardio, and that's how she's usually able to like outwear some of these fighters that might be technically superior than her, and that's where she starts pulling out ahead of them, especially in deeper water. Now here against Bannon, it's surprising to see Sam Hughes at a chalky price, but that kind of just goes to show what she's dealing with here. Like Bannon might be a little bit crisper with the striking and her kickboxing, but she doesn't provide a whole lot of issues in terms of the power that she presents. So I think that Hughes can kind of dictate the pace from jump here, keep Bannon on the back foot. If she wants to implement her wrestling and really just force Bannon to fight off of her back, I think she can do that successfully here. I think her submission defense is good enough to fend off anything that Bannon throws her way. So I like Hughes here. Some people might give me flack for saying this, but I think she's worth the chalk. I think she does what she wants to do to Bannon here and makes it look quite easy. So I'm going to go Hughes and Hughes by decision to start off this UFC Paris card. All right, fun matchup next year in the welterweight division between Andreas Gustafsson coming in at -115, going up against Rinat Fakhretdinov, who comes in at -105. Now, there's a lot of love coming in on Fakhretdinov over the last couple of days, as Gustafsson was closer to about -130, -140 just a few days ago, and now it seems like the line might shift. Now, let's talk about full retard himself, Andreas Gustafsson, who going into his last matchup against Chaos Williams was asked what his game plan was going into that matchup, and he said it straight. He goes, I'm just going to go full retard and try to get the win as best as I can, and he utilized that phrase so effectively considering how he was fighting. He put the pressure on Williams immediately and through endless output and activity, and it really wore Chaos Williams down, and I was surprised that Williams was even able to see the 15-minute mark there. Gustafsson put him through the ringer and just did not stop at all. Now, we've seen that from Gustafsson in the past, right? He likes to utilize his physicality and his strength to keep opponents in bad positions. But then from there, he kind of just wears on them. But in the Williams fight, he seemed a little bit more determined to try to really put his opponent out. And I was surprised that he wasn't able to against Williams. Credit to Williams' durability and just complete knack in terms of just staying in that fight. But Gustafsson put him through the ringer and absolutely made it look, quite dominant as well. He lacks a couple of the technical aspects of the game, but he makes up for it for that sheer tenacity and pressure that he normally brings to the table. And his cardio looks damn good as well, considering, the type of pace that he normally keeps in some of these fights. Now, he's going up against Rinat Fakhretdinov, who doesn't really have the public sentiment on his side anymore. Coming into the UFC, a lot of people were questioning his skill level, and he was able to pull off a couple good wins, that submission over Kevin Lee, that decision over Brian Battle. But his recent fights against Zaleski, Dalby, and Leal are really making people side against him. And rightfully so. There's some of these fights that he probably doesn't deserve to win, specifically that Carlos Leal fight. When you look at the scorecards that people submit for that matchup, it was either 30-27 or 29-28 Leal, not even a single scorecard for Fakhretdinov. Fakhretdinov tried getting his wrestling going, but he was unable to do it as effectively and successfully as he normally does. And Leal was able to outdamage him on the feet, outstrike him, and land more damage throughout that 15 minutes. Yet Fakhretdinov ended up getting the unanimous decision victory. Not even one scorecard in favor of Carlos Leal that night. Very, very weird. Now here, Fakhretdinov is roughly about a year after that matchup, just about a month short of a year, looking to reestablish himself and continue this crazy winning streak that he's on as well. He's 23-2-1 as well, which just goes to show that, he's not getting just weird bounces to give him this 24-2-1 record. I said 23-2-1, didn't I? I believe it's 24-2-1, at least according to my graphic that I put together here. But it seems the steps up in competition that he's taken are making it harder for him to be effective with his grappling and really establishing that top pressure as well. Striking leaves a lot to be desired, throws a lot of just naked shots with big power, but it's all to eventually set up the clinch and the takedown. But in this matchup against Gustafsson, it's going to get harder for him to establish that wrestling. I see this fight from a couple different perspectives. Either Gustafsson's strength allows him to keep this fight upright and really just wear Fakhretdinov down with his pressure and his takedown defense, or Gustafsson continuously engaging in the clinch and pushing Fakhretdinov up against the cage gives Fakhretdinov the openings that he needs to chain wrestle to takedowns and eventually get that top position against Gustafsson. But I think Gustafsson should be able to nullify most of that. I think he's strong enough. I think his defenses are good enough that he should be able to nullify most of Fakhretdinov's top pressure. And then from there, he really starts to put the pressure on with his own damage, his own striking, and his own forward pressure as well. Taking Fakhretdinov at plus money was not a bad shot for anybody, but now that this is trickling closer to that 50-50 line, I'm still leaning Gustafsson. If he ends up finding himself as the underdog or even a bigger underdog by fight time, I may pull the trigger there, but as of right now, I'll keep him strictly as a prediction. I'm going to go Gustafsson by decision. Our next up in the middleweight division, we got the veteran Brad Tavares coming in at minus 210, going up against Robert Bryczek, who comes in at plus 185. Starting off on the Tavares side of things, it's been really rough for him as of late. You know, he was successful last time out, and that luckily kept him from his first ever 3-fight losing streak as a professional, and that win came over Gerald Meerschaert. He was able to outstrike him for the first 2 rounds and nullify the takedowns of Meerschaert, but in the 3rd round, it seemed like he started to slow down a little bit, and Meerschaert was able to pin him against the cage and really just look for that back position, but was unsuccessful in getting it, allowing Tavares to go to the scorecards and win that fight on the scorecards. He is a solid striker. You know, that's kind of been his bread and butter throughout his 15 plus year UFC career. But it's never really gotten him close to a title shot or even into title contention. He's kind of just been that middleweight in a sense, where he just outside of the top 8, showcasing that he's a good gatekeeper in a sense. But now that he's 37 years old, he has a ton of fights under his belt as well. It seems like he's slowly declining throughout his career. It just doesn't look that good for him nowadays. It really comes down to the stylistic matchup that he has against him or ahead of him, and he might have a good one here against the Pole Robert Bryczek, who's looking to bounce back after falling short in his UFC debut back in February of 2024. So it's been a long time since we've seen him inside the cage. I believe he's had some injuries to deal with. He was scheduled to fight in July 2024. That fight ended up falling through, but when he made his debut, he went up against Ihor Potieria, and it seemed like he was very predictable, and a lot of his big winging shots ended up missing, which caused him to start slowing down, and that's where we saw a methodical approach from Potieria to really wear Bryczek down and pull away the later that fight went. And it just was because of the patterns that Bryczek was throwing out there. It was very repetitive and very easy for a guy even like Potieria to catch on, and then really avoid that big damage that was coming back his way. Bryczek was coming over from OKTAGON MMA, knocking out a ton of opponents. He was on a 5-fight winning streak, finishing all of those fights in the first round as well, but just couldn't get it going against Potieria. Maybe it was the UFC jitters. Who knows what it was, but that was not the Bryczek that we had seen, who had finished guys like Lee Chadwick and Pirat, Samuel Kristofic from the OKTAGON promotion. Now, on paper, this stylistically looks like a fight that Tavares should win, right? He should be able to just outbox Bryczek from distance, keep him at range, stick and move, utilize combinations. But this is where we start to wonder if Bryczek really starts to, tighten things up a little bit and get a little bit more unpredictable with his striking entries. He might be able to land a big shot to hurt Tavares and put him away here. Bryczek's not that much younger than Tavares. I think it's only a 2-year age difference there. But again, Bryczek has the power that he could potentially take advantage of the deteriorating durability of Tavares. So it wouldn't surprise me if Bryczek is able to clip Tavares and really change the tide of this fight, which makes it a little bit sketchy for me to trust Tavares at chalk. I think he wins. He has more tools to win. He has more weapons to win, but he's just getting up there in age, and he's just not giving us those classic Tavares performances anymore, and Bryczek is definitely capable of turning out his lights. So in terms of a prediction, I'll go Tavares, but I might be interested in a little bit of a Bryczek KO poke, but the odds need to be really good for me to actually pull the trigger there. Welterweights up next here as we have Sam Patterson coming in at minus 175 going up against Trey Waters, who comes in at plus 150. Now, Patterson finds himself on a 3-fight winning streak since moving up to welterweight. and obviously distancing himself from that nasty knockout loss that he had at the hands of Yanal Ashmus. And I believe that was his UFC debut after winning on the Contender Series. But since then, he's come back with 3 straight first-round finishes, the first 2 of those coming by submission, and then last time around pulling off a pretty big upset against the previously undefeated Danny Borralho, where Patterson was on his back foot for most of that matchup, but he eventually found that opening to counter Borralho, hurt him badly, and then from there he just did not let go, and he was able to get that finish there. That's Patterson at his best, in my opinion. He is a sniper. He's very good with his straight shots down the pipe. I think he was so successful at lightweight because of that 6'3" frame and 78-inch reach that he brought to the table. But I think that the weight cut was really starting to catch up to him, and that could also be why he was knocked out as devastatingly, devastatingly, as badly as he was against Yanal Ashmus. So I think he's like, screw the weight cut. Let's fight at a healthier weight class, and let's just let my skills do the talking. And so far, so good for him. He's also a BJJ black belt, and I love seeing him mix it up the way that he has been recently, whether it's with his striking or mixing in the takedowns and then going for the submission game. He's very good with his long, lanky frame, getting those chokes, getting that front choke series. He's so nasty in terms of putting guys out. And I think we're slowly seeing him start to come into his prime, especially with him being 29 years old. Now, he's going up against Trey Waters, who's also on a 3-fight winning streak. The 2 of those have actually come inside the UFC. He got an opportunity on the Contender Series a couple years back where he ended up coming up short against Gabriel Bonfim. Very understandable loss there considering the skill level of Bonfim. Then he went back to the LFA, knocked out Jalen Fuller in a fight that looked like he was losing for the most part until he landed that big shot on Fuller to put his lights out. Since then, he's outstruck Josh Quinlan, and then he had a great fight against Billy Ray Goff last time around, where he was on the back foot pretty much the entire time, but is really sniping Goff from distance and picking him apart and keeping him at bay there. Waters, similar to Patterson, a long, lanky fighter. He'll actually hold a 2-inch height advantage in this matchup, standing at 6'5", but he'll have a 1-inch reach disadvantage at 77 inches. At his best, he chips away at opponents, utilizes that consistent jab, bloodies up the nose of his opponents, comes down with that right down the pipe as well when he sees the opening, has a decent kicking game as well. His defensive grappling is improving at a steady rate as well, but I think that's where opponents can get the better of him. But they really need to mix their game up well enough to open that opportunity for themselves, because Waters, again, with that frame, he's really hard to get in on. But once you get in on the hips, if you can get some good takedown attempts, double legs, single legs, whatever it is, even trips, I think would be really good from the body lock position. That's where you're able to get the better of Waters. Now against Sam Patterson here, this is a fun fight. Waters obviously going to try to keep Patterson at bay with that jab, with that straight cross down the pipe. But I think we see Patterson a little bit more aggressive with his power, and I think that will allow him to hurt Waters a few times. And I think that could eventually get him to get this fight to the ground. From there, I think we see him utilize his BJJ superiority, and I think he's far superior to Waters on the mat. I think once Patterson establishes a good enough position, he should be able to find that submission and get Waters out of there. And it seems like the public is agreeing with me too. Patterson was about minus 150 just about 48 hours ago, and now he finds himself at minus 175. And as it seems like that money is slowly starting to pour in on the Englishman here. So I'm going to go Patterson, and Patterson by submission. All right, next up, in the welterweight division, we got McKee coming in at plus 110, going up against the UFC debutant and the welterweight Aries FC champion Axel Sola. Lightweight champion, I should say. He's actually coming up to 170 pounds for this matchup. Now, we'll start off on the McKee side of things, who was able to finally earn his first UFC victory after going 0-4 with the promotion over his first 2 stints with the UFC. But last time around, he really put some power and some oomph on his shots, and it seemed to hurt Daniel Frunza from jump, and McKee did not really let the bone go at that point. He just stayed on it, stayed with his pressure, stayed with his power shots, and eventually at the ending of that first round, the doctor was forced to stop the matchup because the damage to Frunza's eye was so bad that he just could not continue on. So credit to McKee for staying on that, seeing the damage and continuing to pour it on, and then from there he did a great job in terms of just sticking with it and pulling off his first UFC victory. And that's usually McKee at his best. He's a guy that likes to utilize a lot of output, volume, range striking, really sniping his opponents from distance. We've seen him try to take the grapple heavy approach, but it's really not worked out for him. It's kind of just gassed him out and left him vulnerable to getting attacked by his opponents, namely Losa and even Chidi and Jakawani. But seeing him just trust his hands a little bit more and throwing with a little bit more vicious intent, I think that gets opponents to respect him more, and that allows him to start taking control of fights a little bit better as well. And that's definitely going to get tested here against Axel Sola, who 10-0-1 coming over from Aries FC, very solid fighter. That one on his draw column was actually against Nasruddin Imavov's brother, Digor Imavov, and that was a close fight. I think Imavov nearly finished him in that first round numerous times, and I think he got a 10-8 there, and then a couple of the other rounds were like kind of flip-flopped, and that's where we got the draw. But since then, Sola 3-0, 2 knockout wins as well. A very solid fighter all around. He trains out of a small gym in Nice, France, which actually holds another Aries FC champion. I think Virgil Augen, I believe the kid's name was. Very, very solid fighter. He normally sets an average pace with a patient striking approach, largely powered by a stinging jab. He likes to stay very consistent with that as well. From there, he either mixes it up with big strikes or takedowns, and then he's often able to establish dominant positions to get finishes once he's able to really get his opponents back on the mat. His level of competition on the regional scene was actually quite impressive. Usually when we see guys come over from some of the European promotions, they just face, guys that are easily foldable, but Sola definitely fought some tough competition there, and I think he's ready for the UFC as well. What's actually interesting is that Sola competed at 170 pounds, I believe for Brave CF was the promotion that he was mainly with before coming over to Aries FC. But once he came to Aries FC, then he went down to 155 pounds, and that's where he became champion. So coming into the UFC, I'm not sure if he's going to be sticking at 170 pounds because this fight was put together on somewhat short notice. But we'll definitely see in his next matchup when he gets a full training camp. But at least he gets to fight in his native France here and make his debut in front of a pro Axel Sola crowd. This is a tough fight to call. Obviously, McKee might be at sky high confidence now considering his last win, but considering Sola's game all around, I think he could be more effective than McKee. McKee's height and reach advantage could definitely put some issues in Sola's striking game, but if Sola can get through that no man's land, get to his own jab, start landing a few takedowns of his own, I think he has more tools to get the job done here. But, being it his UFC debut, I still have some question marks about his ceiling, but in terms of putting him in a position to succeed, this could be the right matchup for him to actually get it done here. So I'm going to go Sola. I think he just puts together a better package here, and then from there he goes on to win this fight on the scorecards. Next up, in the heavyweight division, we got Marcin Tybura coming in at -105, going up against Ante Delija, who comes in at -115. Now, this is actually a rematch of a fight that took place, just a few weeks short of 10 years ago. That night, Marcin Tybura was the M1 champion, and Delija was looking to take the title away from him as he brought in a 5-fight winning streak at the time. It was relatively competitive through the first 2 minutes, where I believe Delija was the one that landed a few bigger shots. And then after he landed a kick on Tybura, he actually broke his leg, Anderson Silva, Chris Weidman style. So that was very unfortunate to see for Delija. Obviously, Tybura wins that night. Tybura would go 14-8 after that matchup. He had actually gotten signed right to the UFC after that fight 10 years ago, whereas Delija has gone 11-3 since that matchup, obviously having to take off a few years after that leg break. But going back to Tybura, he's on a 2-fight winning streak, turning away 2 up-and-coming heavyweight fighters, the first of which he just absolutely dominated and eventually finished Jonata Diniz after landing significant damage through the first 10 minutes of that fight, I believe it was. And then Mick Parkin. Close fight. I thought it really came down to one takedown at the ending of the first round that gave Tybura that fight, but I thought that Parkin won the first round. I thought Parkin clearly won the second round. That was the clearest of them all. And that third round, kind of a toss-up, but I'd side a little bit more with Tybura there. So, veteran performance all in all from Tybura to still go out there and give the previously undefeated fighter the first loss of his career, showcasing his well-roundedness from being a decent striker with good combination striking, some good top pressure as well with his grappling if he can really get that top position. I believe he's a BJJ brown belt or a black belt at this point in time. Obviously, speaking of BJJ, he was submitted in his last fight against Sergey Spivak, where it seemed like Spivak kind of just invited the takedown from Tybura because he had worked so much off his back with submissions, and I think Tybura was very surprised by the submission that came up from Spivak's back, which led to Spivak forcing Tybura to tap that night. But Tybura obviously getting up there in age, 39 years old, not old for heavyweight standards, but still getting up there in age. 36 pro MMA fights. This is going to be his 37th fight. Kind of just lingering in that top 8 to 15 range, being a good gatekeeper as well, kind of keeping the prospects away from the top of the division if they're not ready for it, or he just comes up short against guys that are athletically superior than him. You know, the Tom Aspinall is the I believe Sergey Pavlovich was on there as well. Derek Lewis obviously able to get, or sorry, not Derek Lewis. Who was the other one? There was another name that is escaping me at this moment. But, you know, guys that are usually faster, more powerful than Tybura are usually able to get him out of there, unless they have no ground game like Janata Diniz. Now, talking about Ante Delija, who is actually the former PFL champion. I believe it was in 2022 where he won the title. Great work that entire season. He's done a great job in PFL. Obviously, his own lone losses have came to Bruno Capoloza, and then his last fight against Valentin Moldavsky, or his second last fight, I should say, last fight with PFL it was. But that night, it seemed like he injured his groin or his knee or something. Something was definitely bugging him that night because you could definitely see him not being as aggressive or himself at all against Moldavsky. And Moldavsky smelt it as well, as he was able to really put the pressure on Delija and then get him out of there about 2.5 or 3 minutes into that fight. Then Delija gets released from the PFL. He goes, fights for a smaller organization called FNC and fights a former UFC fighter and Jorgen De Castro, who he absolutely just bum rushes and just finishes. And I think that was less than a minute, if I'm not mistaken. Very good, 42 seconds, I believe it was. So great win from there. He has a solid all-around game. Big power puncher with good combinations, but I think he's best when he can establish the clinch and takedowns, where he's very strong, pushing his opponents against the cage, dragging them to the mat, doing some good work from that top position. We've seen him pull through in deep water as well, especially against guys like Denis Goltsov as well. That was a very impressive performance from Delija. Even though he's coming over from PFL, he's faced some stellar competition. You know, beating Denis Goltsov, beating Renan Ferreira, some of the other guys that he was able to come up against, and really showcasing his dominance as well. Against Capoloza, it just seems like he really couldn't contend with the power and the athleticism of Capoloza, similar to some of the issues that Tybura runs into with some of these heavyweight fighters. In terms of how these guys match up, I think Delija's aggressiveness will help him out. I don't think he has too much of a knockout threat to worry about from the Tybura side of things. In the grappling room, I think these guys are pretty much a scratch. Maybe Delija a little bit of an advantage there because I think he's a little bit stronger. I think he can be definitely more effective, especially pushing Tybura against the cage. But I think even when they're in the open stance, in the open cage, I think that's where Delija can get the better of Tybura, crashing that pocket, landing those big shots, and really putting the hurting on Tybura there. Tybura might have more output and more volume, but I think Delija will be the one landing more meaningful damage, more eye-catching damage, and then eventually mixing in some takedowns as well to get the better of Tybura there. So I'm going to go with Tybura to get the win in his UFC debut. I can't wait to hear about the everybody jumping on the Tybura side of things because he has the UFC experience and all that stuff. I don't think that's going to end up mattering here. These guys have nearly the same amount of fights, and the heavyweight division is usually not that deep in the world. So they've been fighting some pretty high level competition. Obviously, Tybura has a bit of a strength of schedule advantage there, but I don't think it's so much so to the point that he's gonna, that's the main reason he ends up winning this fight. I'm gonna go Delija, and I think Delija actually ends up getting the knockout here. I think he establishes that top position against Tybura, rains down big shots, and eventually gets him out of there. All right. Light heavyweights up next here as we have Umar C coming in at minus 430 going up against Brenjison Ribeiro, who comes in at plus 330. Now, C is going to be looking to bounce back from his first ever pro loss that he suffered at the hands of Alonzo Menefield. That was a fight where C was really struggling to get to his game. He was able to have some success in that second round by landing a few takedowns, some mat returns, getting some good damage off. But in the first and third rounds, he really struggled to get to his wrestling. And it seemed like Menefield was the one landing a little bit more emphatically and landing with more power. And I think that was a good learning lesson for the 29-year-old who, was pretty much streaking his way through his pro career, 11-0 going into his last matchup, finishing Tuco Tokos in his UFC debut, had a pretty solid fight against Da Un Jung, but I think that Menefield fight showed him that there's still some work to be done. At his best, he utilizes his physicality and strength to take opponents to the ground and smash them from that top position, and even opens up submission opportunities, which he often is able to latch on and force a tap from his opponents. I would like to see him continue to work on his striking game, because when he can't get to his wrestling, he needs to be a little bit more methodical and pointed with his striking approach so that he can overcome issues like he faced in the Alonzo Menefield fight. Now, he's going up against Brandon Ribeiro, who had a solid 2-fight winning streak, defeating the likes of Caio Machado and then DR Nergezi in a big upset there where he was able to get the Kimura submission. But then last time around, he was unable to utilize his, it was a massive reach and height advantage that he had over Azamat Mirzakhanov, and Mirzakhanov was able to consistently crash the pocket, land some big shots on Ribeiro, and then eventually get him out of there. So Ribeiro coming off of a knockout loss from Mirzakhanov. Ribeiro has shown many sides to his mixed martial arts game. We've seen him kind of stick around at distance and pick at opponents, landing his big shots, especially with an 81-inch reach, 6'3" frame. It's usually very easy for him to be the one at distance. But as we saw in the Mirzakhanov fight, he finds it difficult to really establish it effectively so that he can just stick to that game plan of keeping opponents at bay from distance. On the regional scene, we've often seen him look to take opponents to the ground and then utilize his BJJ to smother them from there. I think coming off that knockout loss now to Mirzakhanov, we're going to see a little bit more of a grappling kind of intent from Ribeiro. Not saying he's going to go out there and try to Khabib C by any means, but I think we'll see him try to mix it up a little bit more than we've seen him in the past, at least in the UFC. However, I think he's really up against it here against C. I think the UFC did a great job in terms of giving Umar C a very winnable fight to try to bounce back into the win column so that he can get his confidence back about him, and this is a very winnable spot for him as well. I think he gets Ribeiro to the ground with relative ease, and then from there I think he smashes through the guard, gets the dominant positions that he needs, and then I think he eventually gets that finish. Ribeiro has a Hail Mary shot on the feet, but outside of that, I don't think he pulls off a Kimura against C. I think Nergezi just kind of struggles with top position, whereas C a little bit more strong, or definitely stronger than Nergezi, able to kind of establish that top position a little bit easier and fend off any submissions that are coming back his way. So look for C to set up that takedown, get the takedown, blast through the transitions there, and I think he eventually gets that finish within 2 to 2.5 rounds here against Brandon Ribeiro. All right. Next up, we got another high-level UFC debut where we have in the featherweight division, William Gomis coming in at minus 225, going up against the incoming KSW featherweight champion, Robert Ruchala. Now, we'll start off on the Gomis side of things, who's coming off of his first UFC loss that he was handed by Haider Emil in a very action-packed matchup. And I think Hurricane is the best nickname you can give a guy, Haider Emil, considering how he fights. He does not take his foot off the gas. He stays on in his opponent's face, doesn't give them much room to breathe, forces them to continuously fight off their back foot. And even though Gomis was landing some decent shots off of his back foot, it was obvious that the pace and the pressure and the constant output from Emil, mixing some of the takedown attempts as well, was really causing Gomis some issues in that second and third round. It's not often Gomis is going to face a fighter like that, because often even when Gomis is forced to fight off his back foot, he can still land those technical strikes and those straight shots down the pipe. And that's kind of him at his best. We've seen him take a grapple heavy approach in his way onto the UFC, where he's shown great pressure and top pressure. But since coming over to the UFC, he utilizes way more of a mobile striking approach, and he utilizes good kicks, good speed, stinging power as well. Obviously, as we saw when he finished Yanis Kumuri, that was a very weird circumstance anyway. But his win over Joanderson Brito, very impressive. His win over Francis Marshall, very impressive. I believe those were splits as well, very close fights, but Gomis showcasing that he had the takedown defense to hold up against those guys, and then he was able to land more damage and a little bit more pointed effort in terms of landing that damage, rather than those other guys that are trying to establish the pace, the pressure, and some of their takedowns as well. Gomis is clearly improving. I want to give him credit for that, considering the guys that he's been training with, the skill set that he normally brings to the table, very sharp Muay Thai skills. I'd like to see him utilize his grappling a little bit more, because it seemed very effective on the regional scene. But he's going up against a very tough Robert Ruchala that not a lot of people are familiar with. Now, Ruchala comes over from KSW, which is the biggest Polish MMA promotion, probably number 2, definitely top 3 European MMA promotions. You got OKTAGON there as well. You got PFL Europe, obviously doing a lot of big things over there. But KSW, one of the more tenured promotions that's been there, a very long time. And Ruchala was the featherweight champion. I believe it was interim featherweight champion, but still a featherweight champion nonetheless. His only loss came to KSW's biggest star at the moment, Saladin Parnassi, who came down from lightweight to try to capture that title, and he was successful in doing so. That was a tough fight for Ruchala to get to his game. Since then, he's been able to pull off back-to-back knockout victories. Most recently, a very nasty shot that he landed on Kasper Formella. Very fun fight there. I believe that was halfway through the third round that he was able to get that finish. Ruchala utilizes a ton of movement, a lot of unorthodox movement from distance. Not like a Tim Elliott unorthodox or anything like that, but just still a lot of movement, stand switching, loves the kicking game. He also has a smothering grappling game when he can establish that top pressure. But he leaves a little bit too many openings in the striking realm for some fighters to get the better of him. I think he's best when he can get fights to the ground and utilize that smothering approach. But now we get to see with him in the UFC if he's really ready for that next level that the mixed martial arts game brings to the table. The key for him to come to the UFC was actually hiring Joanna Jędrzejczyk as his manager. There's another fighter, Jakub Wiklax, who's also going to be making his UFC debut soon. But those are 2 KSW champions that Joanna was able to get over to the UFC, and we'll see if they can actually make a run and really put Poland on the map once again in the UFC after Jan Blachowicz had his success back in 2020. But in this matchup, I think that we'll see some of those technical striking issues in Ruchala's game come back to haunt him. I think Gomis will be the faster of the two. I think his stinging power will cause Ruchala a ton of trouble here. And outside of the third round, I think Gomis will do a good enough job in terms of keeping this fight upright. And then from there, I think he just gets the better of Ruchala with the striking game. I don't want to completely count out Ruchala because the guy is skilled. And I think we kind of just still are trying to set his ceiling in the UFC. And this will be a good barometer for him, right? Going up against a guy like Gomis, who's dangerous and skilled, but definitely not the best of the featherweight division. I'm going to go Gomis here. Gomis by decision. The chalk is a little bit too much for me to fade a guy like Ruchala, but also the Ruchala round 3 prop may not be a bad consideration, considering we know that Gomis often slows down later on in matchups, and Ruchala has the aggressiveness and the skills to really make it difficult for Gomis. So Gomis is the pick. Gomis by decision, but Ruchala is live to pull off a late upset. All right, next up, sticking with the featherweights, we have another featherweight champion making their UFC debut in the featherweight division. Like I said, we got Patricio Pitbull coming in at plus 170, welcoming Losine Keita to the UFC, who comes in at minus 200. Those odds alone should tell you how highly touted Keita is as he comes into the UFC with a 16-1 record. Let's start off on the Pitbull side of things, who was able to successfully win his first UFC matchup last time around against Dan Ige. That allowed him to bounce back from his UFC debut loss at the hands of Yair Rodriguez. And I think that Pitbull did a good enough job in terms of using the threat of his power to really muzzle the output of Ige. Stylistically speaking, I thought that was a great matchup for Ige to really just put it on Pitbull with the volume, with the pressure, with the activity, because Pitbull often a little bit too muzzled for my liking. Doesn't throw enough output for me to be very confident in him and chalk or even backing him, period. His knockouts have kind of saved him in certain spots. His knockdowns as well has really helped him go out there and win decisions just against Dan Ige as well. Ige picked it up in the third round, but by then it was just too little too late. But it's really the power threat of Pitbull that has made him so dangerous throughout his career. It's very unfortunate that he's 38 years old now, obviously. So like that, we're getting the back end of Pitbull at his career, the majority of his career obviously taking place under the Bellator banner. But, I'm sure every fighter's dream is to eventually fight in the UFC. And I'm glad that Pitbull gets to live that dream out and credit him. This is going to be his third fight in 5 months, showcasing that he really wants to be very busy with the UFC and try to make the most of the time that he has left competing at a high level. And credit him even more from not turning down any of the tests that the UFC are giving him, and specifically the guy that he's facing here this week in Losine, Keita. Now, Keita comes over from Octagon MMA. Like when I was talking about Ruchala coming over from KSW, Octagon is one of the other big promotions in Europe at this moment, selling out stadiums, selling out big venues. They have big stars of their own. And Keita was one of the biggest that they had. The lone loss in his 17-fight career came 65 seconds into a fight against, I think it was Mate Saniskidze. Butchered the name probably. But Keita actually injured his foot at the beginning of that fight and was obviously that fight was forced to be stopped there. He was out for a while, but then he eventually came back and he made his presence be known right away. He's finished 3 of his last 5 opponents, including Ronald Paredes, who's a big-time Octagon MMA fighter as well. Keita just stuck to his game, put that power striking approach on Paredes, and then from there eventually got him out of there. Keita is a power striker, but he's similar to Pitbull, but he throws more, he's more active, has more output, has a better gas tank, has the wrestling if he needs as well, and just nasty all around. I'm very excited for his UFC debut, and I think the odds are somewhat correctly lined here. I think there's a case that you can make that Keita deserves to be an even bigger favorite, but I think the argument starts to come into place. Maybe the strength of schedule advantage that Pitbull has maybe gives him a little bit more credence to pull off the upset here, but I think this is just perfect timing for Keita to take on a guy like Pitbull. I think Keita lands those big shots. I think he lands it early and often, and I think he actually puts Pitbull's lights out. I think it's going to look very dominant, and Keita's going to make his presence felt right away. And I think if he can have that highlight reel KO in his UFC debut, you're already throwing him into the top 10 of the division, especially after finishing a guy like Pitbull. 27 years old, 11-year youth advantage for Keita. I think he's the younger, faster, more powerful, and better version of Pitbull. And I think he absolutely runs through Pitbull here and gets him out of there. I don't think we'll see as much nervousness from him as we saw from another highly touted UFC debut in Aaron Pico from about a month ago now. I think we'll see Keita a little bit more calm, composed, and just ready for the opportunity. And I think he'll come through with flying colors here. So give me Keita and Keita by knockout. All right. That moves us on over to the light heavyweight division now, where we got Modestas Bukauskas coming in at minus 365, going up against Paul Craig, who comes in at plus 300. Now, starting off on the Bukauskas side of things, he rides a 3-fight winning streak after losing by knockout to Vitor Petrino, where he's gone out there and submitted Marcin Prachnio, knocked out Rafael Cerqueira, and then last time around pulled out a very close yet controversial decision over Iwan Kutelaba. That was a close fight. There were a few skirmishes in the pocket throughout that matchup, but the majority of that fight took place with both guys looking to establish dominance in the clinch range. There were no real eye-catching moments from either guy. Scorecards were all over the place, including 2 30-27s either way. Very weird there. And then the last scorecard actually had Bukauskas up in rounds 2 and 3. It was an underwhelming performance, but let's not overlook the fact that Bukauskas is definitely a much better fighter than he was when he first came into the UFC, when he went 1-3 with the promotion. Very good striking, improving grappling game, and I think a lot of his confidence is coming from training with the high level guys that he's teamed up with over there in Europe, with Tom Aspinall, KSW heavyweight champion Phil DeFries. I think Simeon Powell's over there as well now. Bukauskas, he's coming into his own. Is he going to be a championship contender? Probably not. But I think he's a guy that can definitely crack into that top 8 of the division, considering how shallow it is really outside of that top 3 to 4 range of the light heavyweight division. Now he's going up against Paul Craig, who probably saved his career last time around, or at least UFC career last time around, by up-kicking Adolfo Bellator, which obviously we got that weird circumstance where it seemed like Bellator was acting and, very much not with himself. It was very weird. But that saved Paul Craig from going 0-4 over his last 4 fights. So he's still technically riding a 3-fight losing streak. And, those losses coming at the hands of Brendan Allen, Kyle Borralho, who obviously headlines this card, Bo Nickel, who we obviously know, ended up losing his first fight to De Ridder last time around, but still a very high level and tough fighter to deal with, especially with how the styles clashed in that matchup. But Craig is a guy that's kind of just handcuffed to his BJJ style. His wrestling is not all that good, but once he gets fighters to the ground, he's very aggressive with his BJJ, and he's able to submit pretty much any one of his opponents. He's the only guy to finish the current champion, Magomed Ankalaev. He's the only guy I guess not only guy anymore, but he finished Jamal Hill before Jamal Hill became champion, right? So he has those weird wins on his record, but it hasn't looked that great for him now. Through, 20 fights with the UFC promotion now, he's 9-9, 1-1. He started his career with the promotion 3-4. Then he went 5-0-1, which included that win over Jamal Hill. Then he was given Volkan Oezdemir in July 2022, and it's pretty much gone all downhill since then. So it's really tough to make a case for Paul Craig with the style that he brings to the table. He's also been jumping between 185 and 205 pounds. He went 1-3, I believe, at 185 pounds, now jumping back up to 205. He knows where he's at in his career. He's 37 years old. He knows it's not working out for him. So why force himself to try to cut the weight and take those years off his life by doing those bad weight cuts? I expect Bukauskas to really keep Craig at distance, chip away at him, utilize the striking advantage. I think the constant threat of Craig looking for takedowns is going to keep Bukauskas away from throwing too many big shots and being unable to muster up a finish. And I think we actually see Bukauskas just outpoint Craig en route to a decision victory. Minus 365, a little bit wide for my liking. I'll consider whether I end up parlaying him or not, but he should win this fight. It should be pretty straightforward, and I think he wins this fight pretty convincingly. So give me Bukauskas, and Bukauskas by decision. All right. Next up in the lightweight division, we got a banger here with Balaji Oki coming in at plus 110, going up against Mason Jones, who comes in at minus 130. Now, some love coming in on Oki over the last couple of days, as he was plus 140 when I first studied this matchup. Now he finds himself down at plus 110. Now, last time around, he came up on the winning end against short notice UFC debutant Michael Aswell, who came up a division to take that fight, and we saw the effect that had in that matchup. Aswell won the first round, I believe, on all the judges' scorecards, but really start to fall off in the second and third rounds as the size and power of Oki really start to trump the volume that Aswell was throwing, and that led to Aswell getting hit and hurt a little bit more than he was expecting to. Oki is a methodical power puncher with great athleticism, good speed, and good knockout power, but we are seeing him start to settle into those fights where he can just strike from distance, throwing with decent power, but managing his gas tank well enough so that if he's forced to go 15 minutes, he can do it effectively and still end up getting his hand raised. That loss to Chris Duncan was very weird. He got caught in the guillotine, and it seemed like he didn't get put out until Duncan let go of the choke, and that's where you saw Oki really not respond, ate a couple shots, then Duncan realized he was out, and then the referee stepped in there. But Good for Oki to get back on the winning track last time around against Michael Aswell, but he's getting a steep step up in competition compared to who he went up against last time in the form of Mason Jones. Now, Jones is 16-2, and I believe both of those losses, or at least his first initial stint in the UFC, he went 1-2. And after that second loss, he decided to say, hey, I need a little bit more sharpening. I'm going to go back to the promotion that brought me to the big dance, and I'm going to go back to Cage Warriors and really refine my game there. And he did a great job. Finished a lot of his opponents, had a good battle against Michael Pagani, who's obviously on the rise in the Cage Warriors promotion as well. And then he came back to the UFC, and the promotion gave him a great matchup, a perfect stylistic matchup to give an entertaining fight in the form of Jeremy Lil Heathen Stevens. Now, Stevens had been previously cut from the UFC and was, I believe, firmly entrenched in BKFC, but then the UFC decided to call upon him for that matchup against Mason Jones because the fight was taking place in Jeremy Stevens' hometown. Jones obliged with Stevens to pretty much strike with him for the first 2 rounds, and then in the third round, Jones is like, all right, we're done with that stuff. I'm going to dominate you now. And that's where we saw him utilize his grappling to really smother Stevens and pretty much win that fight with relative ease. He's very well-rounded. I think the reason he's so popular is because a lot of his fights are entertaining, but I think now, 30 years old, we see him slowly start to come into his own. He's being a little bit more methodical and showcasing that he realizes that I need to be a little bit smarter if I want to keep my UFC career long, if I want to try to make it into the top 5 of the division, a very stacked lightweight division, albeit. And it's good to see him really maturing in that sense. And he's going to have to utilize that here against Oki. Oki can definitely land some big shots and make this a close fight, which is why I don't completely blame people for betting Oki and bringing the line down a little bit. But I think Jones is ultimately the better fighter here. I think he'll be able to land better shots. I think he'll be able to push Oki the way Oki has not been pushed before. And I think we'll see Jones eventually look to fight to get this fight to the ground. And then from there, I think he does great work from that top position. I think Oki will work to his feet a few times, but I think Jones will continue to mix the game well enough that he lands more damage throughout this matchup, and I think he goes on to end up winning this fight on the scorecards. It could be a close fight, so again, I don't blame anybody for taking the shot on Oki, but as the line starts to close here, the intrigue in Jones and betting him at that minus 130 line starts to increase. So I'll go Jones by decision, but this is definitely a contender of our fight of the night contender when it's all said and done. All right, that brings us to the co-main event, which also takes place in the lightweight division, as we have a clash of styles between Benoit Saint-Denis, who comes in at plus 165, going up against Mauricio Ruffy, who comes in at minus 190. Now, starting off on the Saint-Denis side of things, he was able to buck that 2-fight losing streak that he had by submitting Kyle Prepelic in the second round of their matchup. Now, I believe Saint-Denis was supposed to fight Joel Alvarez that night, but Alvarez forced to pull out, and in steps to short notice Prepelic. But at least Saint-Denis went out there and did exactly what he needed to do. And now his 2 losses against Dustin Poirier and Renato Moicano. Let's quickly talk about those. The first of which against Poirier, he ended up getting knocked out on the second round of that fight. His grappling looked on point in that second round, or that first round. He got the back of Poirier, threatened with a few submission attempts, but was unable to get him out of there. But the thing that was kind of like hindering a lot of people that week was that there was a clear staph infection on Saint-Denis' face, and he obviously, brushed it off leading up into that fight. And then after the fight was over with, he was like, yeah, I was on medication. I was fucked up. He wasn't himself, and that's what could be pointed to in terms of him gassing out as quickly as he did against Dustin Poirier that night. Normally, he can put on a pretty decent pace and really put guys through the ringer and eventually find finishes or TKO spots, but he did not look himself that night. But again, credit to him for trying to still pull it out against a guy like Poirier, knowing that that was the biggest fight of his career to that point. And he got some of those, fight-ending positions. He just couldn't get the job done. Then his next fight against Renato Moicano, he gets caught early, gets hurt badly, survives, but ends up taking a lot of damage to his eye. And then I believe in between the first and second round, the referee was like, hey, we're going to keep a close eye on that, but I'll let you keep fighting. And Saint-Denis just put it on Moicano and clearly won that second round. And then going into the third round, the doctor was just like, hey, this eye is just too fucked up now. I'm sure you could still go out and win the rest of this fight, but for the health and safety of your vision and one of your eyes, I'm going to have to call this fight. And that's how we ended up losing that Moicano fight. So very unfortunate bounces against Saint-Denis to, make him lose the two biggest fights of his career thus far. But I think that the UFC realizes that he is still a guy capable of making it to the top of this lightweight division, considering the style that he fights with. He's a smothering grappler, very nasty BJJ. The power in his hands is obviously improving, considering the knockout wins he has over Thiago Moises and Matt Frivola. I think we're going to see that confidence continue to escalate, but it's really that grappling, specifically in this matchup this weekend, that sets him apart from a lot of his opponents. I was going up against Maurizio Ruffy, who is one of the ambassadors of the Fighting Nerds, who are on full display on this card, obviously, with him in the co-main event and then Kyle Borralho in the main event. But it's really his striking style and flashy style that has really put him on the map for a lot of people. His nasty, I believe it was a flying knee against Jamie Mullarkey. I could be off on that, but nasty knockout against Jamie Mullarkey. The spinning heel kick or wheel kick against King Green last time around. Very nasty stuff. That's Ruffy at his best. When you fight with him at a kicking range, he's going to light you the hell up. And he has good power as well to make a lot of people pay for that. But we've often seen, even in fights that he ends up winning, his grappling is still a work in progress. And we haven't really seen anybody really push him in that since his Contender Series matchup, which he was losing 95% of, then managed to really pull off that finish at the end there to snatch back the victory and earn his UFC contract. But there's been a lot of fights where he's not looked that great in the grappling realm, and he's facing one of the best grapplers in the division here against Saint-Denis. So we're going to get a clear indication whether Ruffy is as good as a lot of people are making him out to be, or if he still has holes in his game that can be exposed, and Saint-Denis is definitely a guy that can do that. I'm always rooting for Ruffy. I love flashy, entertaining fighters, guys that are full of confidence, but I think this is a horrible matchup for him against a guy like Saint-Denis, who should be able to roll with a lot of those big shots from Ruffy, eventually get his hands on him, and then I think once he gets his back, I think it's just a matter of time before he eventually finds a submission. So I think it'll take maybe a round and a half, maybe 2 rounds for Saint-Denis to find that submission, but I love him as an underdog in this matchup. I'm sure I'm going to get flamed for it in the comments section, but I think this is a very winnable fight for Saint-Denis, and I think he ends up getting it done, and I'm going to say by submission. All right. That brings us to the middleweight main event of the evening, where we have Nasruddin Imavov coming in at plus 110, going up against Kyle Borralho, who comes in at minus 130. Now, the Frenchman sees himself as the underdog here as he looks to build upon a 4-fight winning streak he currently has. His last loss came at the hands of eventual UFC middleweight champion Sean Strickland, but he's managed to bounce back emphatically. Decision win over Roman Delija, knocking out Jared Cannonier, going to a decision against Brendan Allen. I believe that was on the last UFC Paris card. And then back in February, knocking out Israel Adesanya after a somewhat pedestrian first round. Now, I want to talk about that fight a little bit more because it's going to pertain to my full breakdown of this matchup. But Adesanya did a great job in terms of disrupting the flow of Imavov, throwing out his feints, throwing his leg kicks, throwing his combinations. And I think keeping that consistent volume and that consistent output really caused Imavov some issues in terms of letting go with his own offense. At his best, we know the Russian sniper likes to stay disciplined at distance and then wait for that opening to throw those straight shots down the pipe. And the way that he caught Adesanya was pretty much an example of how he fights. When he can close that distance, even with the reach advantage he normally has over his opponents, he can land with some big shots and really put guys away that way. But he has been quite beatable as well, right? Jared Cannonier, I think, was up on a judge or 2 judges' scorecards going into that 4th round against Imavov. I don't think Delija had all that much success against him anyway, but it really comes down to the style. He's mainly a striker. We obviously saw him shoot a few takedowns against Adesanya, so he's trying to round out that side of his game, which is really not coming to fruition. He's a guy that in the past has been grinded out as well. We saw Brendan Allen has some solid success against him in the first round, but he's clearly improving. He's definitely a much better fighter than he was when he faced and lost to Phil Hawes earlier in his career, and he's gaining that confidence in his power and his striking, and I think that's what's led to the success he's had this far and brought him into this number 1 contender opportunity. Unfortunately for him, I just think he's fighting a better, smarter, and more educated fighter here in Borralho. Now, Borralho only lost his 2nd ever pro fight, and since then, he's known nothing but victory. He's won 16 straight fights, looking for his 17th straight victory this weekend. Put on dominant performances pretty much every single time out, from Makhmud Murdov to Mihailo Alexejczuk, the Abus Magomedov fight. Worked Paul Craig like a fiddle and eventually finished him in the second round. A dominant performance against Jared Cannonier, and that one specifically, going into that, me and a lot of people thought Borralho needed to go back to his wrestling to have success, to keep Cannonier away from the striking advantage that he seemed to have on paper. But Borralho was the one that was landing more emphatic strikes from the standing realm. He utilized that karate-style stance, darting in and out of the pocket, landing his 1-2s down the pipe, and then pivoting back out into range so that Cannonier couldn't hit it with anything big in return. Borralho even nearly finished Cannonier in the last round of that fight, showcasing that he can go a hard 25 minutes fighting in different ways and really causing a lot of frustration for his opponents. And I think that's exactly what he's going to be able to do here against Imavov. Unless Imavov lands that big shot and puts Borralho away within the first 3 rounds here, I think Borralho paints a masterpiece. From his striking to his takedowns to his control, I think we'll see him put together a perfect game plan to really stifle Imavov, and that should lead to Borralho winning a pretty dominant victory here. It wouldn't surprise me if he gets a late finish, but I think for the most part, it will be Borralho outpointing Imavov, winning this fight either 49-46. I'd be surprised if it's as close of a 48-47. I'm thinking he either wins 4-1 or 5-0 on the scorecards, and I think he maybe earns himself a title shot. I don't know if the UFC wants to wait until October to see what happens with Fluffy and De Ridder before they give Khamzat his next matchup, but Borralho likely will end up being the next challenger, and I can't wait to see how he would do against a guy like Khamzat. So, just putting a bow on the breakdown here, I'm going to go Borralho by decision, and I love him at this -130 line. Very surprised it's not wider. I thought a lot of people would read more into Borralho's ability to have more tools to win this matchup, his grappling, his educated striking. I thought that would put him up closer to -200 if I'm being honest. -185, whatever it is, but at -130, yes, please, give me some Kyle Borralho, and I think he wins this fight on the scorecards. There you guys go. Full card breakdown for UFC Paris. It's nice to finally have the UFC back on schedule. Obviously, the Contender Series has been filling our cup in the meantime. Contender Series goes down tomorrow, which I've already broken down for you guys. So check out the YouTube page if you want to see those breakdowns. We'll also have LFA going down this weekend, which I will be breaking down on the Legacy Warriors podcast, but that won't be coming out until Thursday. So stay tuned for that on the YouTube page here. As usual, all the other content dropping as usual. Make sure you guys check it out on the YouTube page. Hit that subscribe if you haven't already. Again, I'm trying to hit 10,000 subscribers before middle of October, aka the ending of the Contender Series season. So if you can help me by hitting that subscribe if you haven't already, please do so. Otherwise, I'll see you guys again tomorrow for the top 3 lock of the night candidates for UFC Paris. See you then. Peace.
Last thing.